Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands has 5 minutes remaining in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I spoke about the issue of prorogation because even when we have a historical opportunity to ensure that prorogation is never again used in an illegitimate manner, yesterday I stated that, in my opinion, that the motion before us is not an effective way of ensuring that prorogation will not be used in an illegitimate way.
The subject of prorogation by suggesting to this House, as I have suggested to the Honourable Government House Leader in a paper I prepared on things that we can do in our standing orders, the advice from Professor Hugo Cyr. He's a professor at University of Quebec at Montreal, and he raised with us, as did Professor Peter Russell, Professor Emeritus from University of Toronto, before the Special Parliamentary Committee on Electoral Reform, additional reforms for democracy that we should consider making. Professor Cyr's approach is this, quote, to amend the standing orders of the House of Commons so that asking for Parliament to be prorogued or dissolved without first obtaining the approval of the House of Commons automatically results in a loss of confidence in the Prime Minister. Consequently, the Governor-General would not be bound by a Prime Minister's advice requesting the early dissolution or prorogation of Parliament without first obtaining the approval of the House of Commons, unquote. This is a very sensible proposal. What the government has proposed is, I suppose, a form of an improvement, but there's nothing in the government proposal that would stop the abuse of power, such as we saw when Stephen Harper shut down Parliament to avoid a vote he knew he was going to lose. Unfortunately, the opposition parties had just recently voted on the speech from the throne, mistaking what they thought was mere formality. It was actually a confidence vote, and that's why the Governor-General at the time refused to deny Mr. Harper his request for prorogation. Although it is historically an affront to parliamentary democracy, we need to close that door now, and this proposal from the government doesn't do it. Similarly, I was pleased to see that the motion would deal with omnibus bills and allow them to be split, only to be crestfallen to realize that they're only going to be allowed to be split when it comes to voting on them, not for studying them. And it's actually the case, Mr. Speaker, that on one of Harper's omnibus bills, in fact, spring 2014, Bill C-31, I went to committee, as I was by that point mandated to do by the new motions that were passed to deny me my rights at report stage, and I had amendments to various sections of the bill. These omnibus bills were so big that when I got to committee with amendments to a section, that was the moment when members around the committee realized, oh, we haven't had any witnesses on this section. It was a commercial chemicals section, by the way. I wanted an amendment relating to asbestos. They looked around each other and said, we have had no witnesses on this. We haven't studied this. We certainly can't take amendments. But they could, in fact, pass it because we were under time allocation. The bill wasn't studied properly. When you have multiple sections pushed into the same bill, it's a small improvement to say that the Speaker can split them out for purposes of voting. But we really need those sections split out for purpose of study. So again, the recommendation from the Honourable Government House Leader is a small improvement, but a long way from being adequate. There are a lot of other things that we could look at while we have a chance in looking at standing orders, Mr. Speaker. Again, going back to the advice of Professor Peter Russell and Professor Hugo Cyr to the Special Parliamentary Committee on Electoral Reform, we are one of the only modern democracies which doesn't have a mandatory period between when an election takes place and when the newly elected government convenes Parliament. This is a loophole that has not yet been exploited or abused, but there's no reason not to close the door on that loophole now. Fundamentally, what's terribly sad about this process is that we lost the opportunity to achieve a consensus on how to change our standing orders. This remains a historical and not a good historical precedent where the party with the majority of seats in this place, even though it doesn't have the majority of votes across the land, was able to push through, and I'm no doubt the votes are there to push through this particular motion. I would urge the Government House Leader and the Liberals to seriously consider adopting the NDP amendment. It will do no violence to the principles they are espousing. It would at least allow omnibus bills to be split for purposes of study. I urge this to my colleagues. I also hope that in the future we can return to some of the other proposals I've made, particularly taking into account the carbon footprint created by our parliamentary schedule. I continue to maintain we need to consider very closely changing the days and the weeks in which we sit in order to intensify our time in Ottawa and thus reduce the millions of dollars and tons of greenhouse gases as we fly back and forth to this city. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.